Welcome to another episode of The Art of Feminine Negotiation. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today I'm happy to introduce you to Andrew Culkin, and we're going to be talking about negotiating with the alcoholism of a loved one. So welcome, Andrew. It is so good to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And for those who don't know Andrew, he is the author of Amanda, A Cautionary Tale of Alcoholism. And he's also the founder of his sought-after coaching program, There's an Alcoholic in the Family. And Andrew's a regular speaker in rehabilitation facilities across California and a regular guest on podcast, radio, and television. And I wanted to share, I was excited about this topic because we have a long history of alcoholism and addiction issues in our family. And when I had the opportunity to meet with Andrew and find out about the work he does, I thought it'd be a great topic to talk about because negotiating with people with addictions or alcoholism can be a really tricky issue. So, Andrew, why don't we start? Tell us, why are you telling this story about alcoholism and where did it come from for you?
It really came from my book. Originally started, obviously, it's about my wife. I was married for 25 years. We were together for 27 years. And, slowly she started drinking in the early days when we were first together. She'd have a glass of wine here at night. We were brokers, insurance brokers.
Okay.
So it was a very stressful job.
Yep.
And eventually that couple glasses of wine turned into a bottle, and then it turned into two bottles. And then it became a very big issue.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as a family member, I was just woefully ignorant of what was happening before me because I'd had no exposure to alcoholism like so many people. And it really came from just my personal struggle. And eventually she passed away in 2020 from severe alcoholism.
Oh,
It
I'm
just
so
took
sorry.
over every aspect of her life.
Yeah, no, it does. It's a horrible disease. It doesn't get enough attention, and there's so many myths surrounding the issue. So I'm so sorry about Amanda's passing, and kudos to you for sort of broaching the subject. It's one of those taboo things that we tend to not talk about. Everybody likes to sweep it under the rug. So I'm
Exactly. That's what the more we talk about it, it's the only way we're ever going to solve it and educate people, because people don't really understand it, and people are very reactionary towards it, and they don't understand what's really going on.
Yeah, this and other mental health issues. So we sort of alluded to some of the myths. So why don't we dig into that? Like, what are some of the myths around alcoholism?
Well, a lot of them, people don't realize that alcoholics walk amongst us. They could be your teacher. They could be your airplane pilot. Unfortunately, they could be, your politician. They walk amongst us, and they're not just the homeless guy in the corner.
Absolutely.
They're members of our family and of our community, and we have to recognize that it's a mental health disease, and we have to expose it and talk about it. It's the only way we're ever going to grow, really as a world, to be better educated on what's going on.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you had mentioned about no, I don't know if you called it the warning signs, but that you were woefully ill prepared to know what you were dealing with. What
Right.
are some for our listeners out there who I think most families are touched by this and many are in denial. So what are some of the signs that you have an alcoholic in the family?
Well, the biggest sign is if it's consistency. If someone is consistently drinking on a regular basis, it's more than just the weekend. If the weekend starts on Thursday and ends the following Wednesday, it's becoming an issue. Okay. That and drinking in isolation, when someone is hiding themselves, they're drinking alone, they're hiding in their room and they're drinking. The other big flag is if they're hiding their bottles and cans. You think a lot of people don't think about this, but if they're not throwing them in the garbage where they can be found, and they're hiding them behind books, underneath couches, underneath the bed, they realize there's a lot of shame attached, and those are big red flags. Those three things: consistency, drinking alone, and hiding their alcohol.
Yeah.
Big red flags.
Well, and I think we're seeing a real increase in these issues now. And, COVID certainly has exacerbated the problem for this and other mental health issues, frankly. So why do you believe that alcoholism and related mental health issues are more relevant now than ever?
Well, it's certainly with the advent of COVID from 20 to 23, we shut everything down.
Yeah.
So, and we left we left the liquor stores open, which we had to. If we had closed the liquor stores down, I think we would have had riots in the streets.
Yeah.
You just can't take that away from everybody. But as a result, there's been about a 25% increase in alcohol-related deaths directly because of COVID. So instead of 140,000 that die normally in a year, it's closer to 200,000 directly related to COVID. Alcohol sales went up 46% during COVID. So,
Wow.
I mean, if I'd known that, I think I wish I bought stock in Jack
Yeah.
Daniels in 2020, you know. I mean,
Yeah. They're
it's
pretty,
kind of it's a sad number, but it increased exponentially. There's
yeah.
more alcohol sales happened in those 3 years than in the last 10 years,
Yeah, it's a
which created
staggering number. Like really, when you
staggering.
think about it, it's a staggering number. And it was interesting because in our jurisdiction, I mean, they declared liquor stores an essential service, and that was the
Oh, no.
basis on which they were allowed to stay open when so many other businesses closed down, which is pretty telling in and of
Oh, it is.
itself. Yeah. So what
Absolutely.
advice do you have for our listeners on how to, I would call it negotiate or navigate if you have an alcoholic in the family? What are some of the steps to take out?
Well, I always say you have to look in the mirror as a family member, and if it's affecting you adversely, if it's making you sad, if it's making you anxious, if you're angry, if you have a lot of animosity, well, then it's an issue.
Yeah.
You don't have to ask the alcoholic if it's affecting you. If
Yeah.
it's affecting you, it's affecting everybody in the family.
Yeah.
And that's when you need to step in. If it's time for an intervention, with my wife, I did a one-on-one intervention, and that really, you're really getting boiling it down to the point of you drawing a line in the sand. We can no longer have this boundary's been crossed. You're drinking too much, and we need to do something about it. And you need to go to a rehab. You know, the first one was difficult. She didn't want to go, and eventually she did. And it lasted a while, but eventually she went to 7 rehabs.
Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
but to negotiate with a family member, you know when you're ready to negotiate. You know when it's bothering you to the point where you need to step in to do something. And that means you have to draw a line in the sand, and you either need to depart from the relationship if it's a husband and wife relationship, or you need to seek outside professional help. And that
Yeah.
person needs to they need to go to rehab, and then they need to go to, once they're out, which is the real work, you need to go to group counseling like AA, or there's a plethora of different
Yeah.
counseling places. There's more than AA now, but
Yeah.
and you need to have an accountability partner. That's what I really train a lot of people on. You know, going to a rehab is just the beginning.
Yeah.
That's just where it be. That's the band-aid.
Yeah.
Okay, that's when you're taking a break from the alcohol. The family gets a break. The
Yeah.
real work happens when you get out.
Yeah. Okay. And it's interesting. Well, I want to really put a pin in something and circle back that you said, because so far you focused at first on like on the person who is the family member. And I think that's the piece that so often gets forgotten. Everybody's so focused on the person with the alcoholism issue or the
Right,
whatever addiction issue, and we ignore ourselves, and it is
right.
exhausting and draining, and then we're no good to anybody. So I'd love if you could just speak to that for a moment about why that's so important. And also, you alluded to the fact about that, hey, if it's a separation, like, is there a time when you need to just move on? And if so, how do you know when that is, Andrew?
Well, there's no cookie cutter question for when to
Yeah.
move on. That's always an individual problem. But if it's disrupting your life to the point where it's affecting you, my point has always been you don't want to go down with the ship. There's no point that 2 of you have to
Yeah.
die, or two
Yeah.
of you have to be affected so adversely that you can't recover. So there comes a time where you have to cut the cord, and you'll know when that happens. Now,
Yeah.
it's much more difficult when it's a parent-child relationship, because you can't obviously desert your child.
Yeah.
But I'm a big advocate of tough love.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to push that person, and you have to cut them off to make them realize that they need to change their ways, or it needs to be addressed
Yeah.
at the very least.
Yeah.
You have to have a conversation, and it really needs to be addressed. People are so afraid to address the situation, and they just let it get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
People don't realize if you don't address the situation, you're gonna have a short life.
Yeah. And you can't force somebody to go to rehab. I mean, that's the other
No,
problem. People need to be ready to acknowledge and accept it, and railing at them or about it or against it is not going to help. So I'd love if you could touch on what are some of the most sort of alarming truths, if you will, about alcoholism that our listeners need to know in order to negotiate with a loved one suffering from alcoholism.
alarming truths. I mean, really what we've been talking about. If you see these habits taking place, yeah, I always talk about, like in my coaching program, we talk about the 4 stages. The first stage is the average person starts their alcoholic career between the ages of 13 and 20.
Wow.
So if you can catch them in their early 20s, and you're able to recognize that they have a problem.
Yeah.
Because most people start, kids start in high school and college.
Yeah.
It's a way to adapt. It's a way to, a lot of kids are shy or they're introverts. It's a way to, become something that you're not. It's a way to be able to just fit in with the crowd, to be one of the cool people. It's not
Yeah.
just alcohol, but it starts with alcohol.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest alarming truths about that is most people grow out of it, but there's a good percentage of people that never do. And it continues on into their 20s and 30s. And they, as a family member, you have to recognize that. I talk about the family a lot because they're really the frontline people
Yeah.
to have the ability to recognize, or close friends.
Yeah.
They're the ones that can really help that person.
Yeah.
And the strongest relationships with that person are the ones that are going to have the best chance and the greatest opportunity to change the trajectory of that person and get them out of harm's way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so important. And, you talked about an intervention and that tough love piece. And these are difficult conversations to have. And that's why I keep calling them negotiations, because it is a negotiation. And,
It's a negotiation.
and you need to prepare for this like any other negotiation. So what tips do you have about things maybe our listeners need to understand or should think about in order to help them negotiate and have the difficult, whether it's a first or multiple conversations with a loved one who's an alcoholic?
Initially, you have to get away from your reactive emotions. When
Yes.
you're close to somebody, you have to get away from the animosity, the anger. That's going to come natural when you have somebody who's failing and
Yeah.
you come home and they're covered in vomit and urine. I mean, it's not an exciting thing.
Yeah.
My wife, for example, drove through the front of our house twice, passed out in the living room one time. She smashed the whole front of the house out.
Yeah.
And these are things, it's hard not to have animosity, but you have to realize that this is a mental illness and we have to have empathy and we have to approach it differently. We have to approach it as a mental health illness,
Yep.
and we have to make that person recognize that it's a life or death situation.
Yeah.
And you have to sit down and have the conversation. You have to have the conversation with these people. And if there's denial and they're not willing to change or to make a change or to go to a rehab or at least go to some kind of counseling or address the problem, and then you have to think about parting ways.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's that simple.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can do in someone's life. You can do as much as you can and as long as you can. But if it's dragging you down, if the person's not changing or they're not willing to change or they're in deep denial, I've seen so many families that have been crushed by it. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
And otherwise we end up enabling and you have that codependency. And I want to speak about that in a second. But before we do, I just want to put a pin in a couple of things that Andrew said there, because they're so in line with, when we speak about the art of feminine negotiation, and that's that concept of reactivity, right? Being so many negotiations fail because we allow ourselves those emotions to creep in and we end up coming from a reactive place. So,
right,
one of the models I really encourage, I call it the no fear model. Like before you have the conversation, go through FEAR, your fear, like address your
right,
fears, your ego, leave your ego out of it. Think about the A is attachment. What are those things you're too attached to? And that R, as Andrew said, is that reactivity piece, right? How can you prepare yourself so you don't end up being reactive? And I also want to put a pin in because Andrew talked about empathy. And this applies in all negotiations, frankly, as well. Being able to truly put yourself in the shoes of the other person and approach that difficult discussion from that perspective. So important. And so with that, I want to circle back in here because you talked about that, like what you were describing is what I think a lot of people would call enabling behavior. And we, with
right.
all the best intentions, we do that so often, whether with our kids or our loved ones, whether our intimate partner. What are some of the signs that you've become either codependent or an enabler to an alcoholic?
Well, one of the big things, and it's easy to do, sometimes you just want to have peace in your house that night.
Yeah.
So I would purchase, a bottle of wine and give it to her just so I could have peace that night
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a way you're taking self-love by just allowing the activity to take place. And
Yeah.
that happens a lot. Allowing, giving people money, giving people a car, providing for someone, especially with children. You're letting them live in your house and yet they're taking every advantage that you have. That needs to stop. That's codependency. With
Yeah.
a husband wife, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And you have to have that conversation. that's part of negotiation, or that's part of an intervention, is when you
Yeah.
say these things are going to stop. I'm no longer
Yeah.
going to provide you with these services unless this behavior stops.
Yeah. Yeah. And that circles back to, I think, what you said earlier about boundaries, right? Like this, like any negotiation, it's important to know going in, what are the boundaries you're going to set? And I think when we're dealing with addictions, and most addicts are, whether alcohol or other addictions, they become very accomplished liars. And when they're in that denial stage, sometimes it's easier to just let the conversation go rather than engaging and engaging and engaging.
Right.
And in doing that, we end up further enabling.
Well, the only way to be successful is to control your own emotions as a family member. You have to be in control of your emotions and not let them get out of hand, not let them be reactive. That's the biggest takeaway, really. If you can control your emotions and remain mature and stable, which is difficult sometimes, especially when someone's lied to your face 1,000 times. They're lying to themselves as well. And there's a lot of gaslighting. They'll put it on the loved ones. I'm not the one with the problem. You're the one with the problem. Yes. And that's just the most classic gaslighting technique of all. They throw the blame in your direction.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's chat about that for a second. And for our listeners out there, I want you to really hear that, because that happens almost always. So when you're dealing with a loved one who's an alcoholic, and it is so easy to let yourself get sucked into that mode where you then become, you're suddenly defending yourself as opposed to actually dealing with the issue that's at hand. And so, and also taking advantage of resources, taking care of yourself, as Andrew's saying, like go get counseling yourself, or go to Al-Anon or one of those organizations that helps dealing with family members who are dealing with somebody who is an alcoholic, so that you have resources, you've got support network yourself, so that you've got that check-in, so that if you're getting gaslit, as you say, Andrew, what's your experience around that?
Well, so yourself doesn't go, so you don't go crazy yourself, because you can really question yourself. Gosh, am I doing the wrong thing here? When you're in reality, you're the voice of reason.
You're
the voice of reason. And after years of being questioned, sometimes you wonder about that, and you do need counseling yourself sometimes. I mean, you need to talk to somebody yourself, or if you don't have anybody, talk to close family members, what they think. You need support from within your own circle. And it's okay to, instead of not talking about it, you should be talking about it and how you're feeling with other people that are outside of the situation. Sometimes it's good to talk to somebody who's not so close to the situation.
And that involves releasing any embarrassment around it, right? Recognize every family has this somewhere in their family. I mean, it is just with the kind of numbers that Andrew is sharing with us here. I mean, it's a pretty significant problem. So at least give yourself the perspective to know that you're not alone. And part of that, I think, I often say our first and most important negotiation is negotiating our own mindset. And that goes across the board in any. So any tips you have on how to negotiate our own mindset so we can show up from a really grounded, powerful place to try and have a better shot at getting better outcomes?
Well, you can sit there and imagine what life would be without that person, or what would life be if that person was healthy again, and go back to where you were before the alcoholic dependency took place, and just remember where you were then, and try to find that happy spot again in your own life. Try to understand that, but really be cognizant of how it's affected you. And understand your own boundaries. You have to understand you just can't take it any further yourself.
That is so key. And again, I know I sound like I'm beating a horse on this one, or beating a drum, but it just really, for any of our listeners out there who are dealing with this right now within your own family, we tend to put the focus on the other person. We need them to change, which we do, but it all starts with you, right? How you show up, how you approach it, and taking care of yourself and your boundaries and your needs. Now, I'm curious, Andrew, I think as writers, we often have epiphanies in the writing of the book. I mean, you had this profound traumatic experience in your life, and you're using that to catapult to do good for others. Was there one thing in particular that you found really surprising or shocking that you discovered while you were writing the book, even having lived through it?
I think for me, it was a catharsis. It's really how instead of going to Al-Anon, I wrote this book, and all of this came, the that's what I really discovered
Yeah.
is instead of talking to other people, I put my soul into writing this book. It
That's
turned
beautiful.
out to be 600 pages, and then we had to
Yeah.
shorten it, and everybody was like screaming out, "It's too long! It's too long!" But that's and then the coaching program. It all happened organically because I shared a lot of things on social media, and then I have hundreds of people asking me questions,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I realized they had a lot of knowledge, just a lot of firsthand knowledge. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a salesman for a long time, which is pretty
Yeah.
much the same thing as a
Yeah.
psychiatrist. But so this is what I discovered in myself is that
Yeah.
the best way to heal and to give my wife a good foundation for future people, for the future is
Mhm.
to help other people,
Yeah.
to give her a better legacy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that you did that. And hidden in there as well for our listeners, if you're dealing with it, journaling is actually not a bad way as well to kind of,
Right.
sometimes you can get epiphanies when you just take the time to sit and just write down. You get a little bit of clarity, and sometimes our subconscious comes through more strongly and we recognize things that we're feeling or experiencing that we haven't really given voice to or recognized yet.
And, being able to review everything again
Yeah.
and walk through it and where were you at that point, and you kind of discover things about yourself.
Yeah.
And there was a big turning point. There was one big epiphany. I remember this. I talked about it on a podcast the other day. Is when my mother died. My parents lived in New York. I live in California, and we flew out there, and she had a stroke, and it was this long process. And we used to have to go to the. I brought my wife at that time,
Yeah.
and I had to go to we had to go to the hospital every single day.
Yeah.
And when I came home one day, my wife had cleaned out my dad's liquor cabinet, and she was passed out in his living room,
Yeah.
in a puddle of urine. And it was kind of the breaking point for me.
Yeah.
I was dealing with my beloved mother dying, and then I had to do nothing but deal with my wife. And eventually I had to send her home because it was such
Yeah.
an ugly situation.
Mm.
And
And thank you.
that was the breaking point for me.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for being so vulnerable about that. Because again, one of the things for our listeners, I want to point out when we're in this situation, or frankly, any really difficult situation, and if you're in an abusive relationship, for example, or I mean, I find when we're in difficult situations, we keep lowering the bar without even realizing it, and we lose perspective. It is so easy if you don't take care of yourself and allow yourself to get that external help as well for you, not just for your loved one. It's easy to completely lose perspective, and other people on the outside would be going, what the heck, like what,
Right.
everybody else sees it so clearly, but it can be really challenging when we're inside it sometimes. Now, do you have any
Absolutely.
non-negotiables, Andrew, that you would say in dealing with a loved one who's suffering from alcoholism?
Yeah, well, it's like you can't cross this line. You can no longer. I used to say it all the time. You can no longer. I said it till I was hoarse. Just stop drinking. Just stop drinking. Just stop drinking. These are, things you can't negotiate. You can no longer negotiate it. You can
Yeah.
no longer live with it. And it's just. I think it's just all about approach. Just how you approach it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And what role does creativity play, do you think, if any, in sort of negotiating with somebody suffering from alcoholism?
Well, you get real creative. You get very creative. Initially, like you hide alcohol. I used to do that and try to get creative and think, oh, I got a heads up. I found their alcohol and I hid it.
Yeah.
Well, then it just becomes this huge, blown up
Yeah.
argument. It becomes a huge issue, a lot of drama, and it's not worth it. And then they go find alcohol somewhere
Yeah.
else. And you think you're being creative when you're not really addressing the problem
Yeah. Yeah.
directly. The only way to address the problem is head on, directly, face to face. It's the only way it's going to be solved.
Yeah. Okay. All
You
right.
know.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Andrew. I think this is such an important issue, always has been. The numbers, as you say, sort of post-COVID are just rising dramatically. It's becoming a bit of an epidemic, whether alcoholism or other mental health issues as well. So for our listeners out there, I hope you got some value from this. And Andrew, I normally like to end by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And this doesn't have to be about this issue at all, just one of those aha moments where you looked at things differently and showed up differently in life.
But I think when my wife passed away, the overriding emotion wasn't sadness. Unfortunately, it was relief.
Yeah.
And just like it's like somebody gave my life back.
Yeah.
And that was a big watershed moment in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, it took me a year before I actually cried and actually felt like I missed this person.
Yeah.
Because it was just so much drama and just craziness. But
Yeah.
it's okay to feel your own emotions. It's
Yeah.
okay to feel, what's the best way? It's okay to feel relief when
Yeah.
someone passes. It really is, for
Yeah.
yourself and for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's beautiful advice, and on so many levels, right? At every step of the process, to recognize and honor the emotions that you're feeling, hurt and anger and upset and resentment and the whole, dashed hopes and all the range of emotions that dealing with. And again, I want to circle back to that point about, for our listeners out there who are dealing with this right now, is putting yourself at the forefront, because you're, much like the overused analogy about the oxygen mask, right? I mean, unless you're able to show up from a place of strength and groundedness, you're going to have very little ability to negotiate persuasively with anybody, but particularly with an alcoholic or somebody suffering from addiction issues. So, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing with us. It was great to have you here today.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
And where can people learn more about you and your programs, Andrew? Where would you like me to send them?
Well, you can go to www.amandacautionarytale.com for the website for the book. And you can go to www.an alcoholic in the family for the coaching program, which is being released next week.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes so that people can. And I encourage you, if you're dealing with this, get some resources, reach out to Andrew, read the book, and make sure that you come well prepared. Every negotiation involves preparation. It's probably more important than leverage or even your skill set, frankly. So allow yourself to be well prepared. And I am sure you all got loads of value from this episode. I have no doubt it is at the very least really increased your awareness. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that already, and also give the gift of sharing. If you know anybody who is dealing with this issue in their family, share this podcast episode with them so that they can reach out and kickstart their journey to deal with it in the most effective way possible. And before we sign off today, I just wanted to share some ways that we can work together if you are looking to uplevel your negotiation skills. And as is obvious from this episode, all of life is a negotiation. So many of those difficult conversations and situations we find ourselves in are negotiations. And I've got everything from online to group to my signature one-on-one masterminds and VIP experiences to help you better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that sounds interesting to you, just check out our website at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And also make sure to grab a copy of my book, Art of Feminine Negotiation, if you have not done that already. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.